I saw in my own son's eyes the same vacant look my great-grandfather had before he tried to hang his own sister. It was in that moment that I knew my family's nightmare had returned. Good afternoon, my dears. It's Grandma Helen here, 72 years old and speaking directly from my little house in Laredo, Texas, right on the border with Mexico. This desert air is a blessing when it's warm, you know? Today, I'm here to share with you a story I've kept deep in my heart for over 30 years. A story of love, of sorrow, and of how destiny sometimes weaves traps we never see coming. But before we begin this difficult journey, I'd like to ask for a small favor from the heart. Give this video a like. It doesn't cost a thing. And tell me in the comments what part of the country you're watching me from. I'd love to know your name. I also love reading every single one of your comments. It makes me feel less alone in this big house that holds only me and my memories now. I was born in 1953 in a simple but well-kept house in the Cerro neighborhood, right here in Laredo. My parents, Robert and Maria Lopez, were hard-working people. Dad was a carpenter who made furniture that was truly a work of art, with curves and carvings you rarely see anymore. Mom was a seamstress for hire, mainly making party dresses. The house was always filled with colorful fabrics, laces, and ribbons she used in her work. I had a happy childhood, you know. I'd play in the street with the other kids and walk to school holding hands with my older sister Josephine. Our house didn't have luxuries, but we never went without food on the table, or love. Oh, and how there was so much love in that house. My father, even when he was tired from work, always found time to tell stories before bed. My mother would hum all day long while she sewed, making the house feel brighter, more alive. The only shadow on our family came from the stories about my paternal great-grandfather Antonio. He died long before I was born, but the stories about him were whispered by the adults when they thought we children weren't listening. They said he had mental problems, that he would sometimes go for days without sleeping, talking nonsense, and seeing people who weren't there. That he once tried to hang his own sister because he thought she had been replaced by a snake disguised as a person. "It's a thing that runs in the blood," my grandmother would quietly tell my mother. "Thank God it skipped a generation. Neither your father nor you had it." I grew up hearing those stories like scary tales, with a shiver down my spine, but knowing it was a thing of the past that wouldn't affect me. How wrong I was, my God. But let's take it slow because this is a long story and I want to tell you every little detail. I finished school when I was 18 in the early 70s. It was a beautiful time, you know. You dreamed, you had hope for the future, even with all the country's difficulties. I got a job as a secretary at an accounting firm downtown. I didn't make much, but I helped out at home and still had a little money left over to buy some lipstick and new sandals once in a while. It was at that firm that I met Felipe. Oh my God, Felipe. Just saying his name, even after all these years, my heart still flutters differently. He was an accountant, a recent graduate who had moved from Dallas to work in the city. He had broad shoulders, dark hair, and the most striking thing, those honey-colored, almost golden eyes when the sun hit them just right. A handsome man, you see. Not just because he was my husband, no, but he was a sight to behold. I remember our first meeting like it was yesterday. He came into the office carrying a stack of files he could barely balance. I was organizing some documents, and when I looked up, I saw this clumsy young man trying not to drop everything on the floor. I rushed to help him. Our hands touched for an instant, and that was it. It was like a jolt of lightning, you know? That electric current that runs through your whole body when you meet someone special. "Thank you so much," he said, with that smile that I would later discover was uniquely his. "I'm Felipe, the new accountant." "Helen," I replied, feeling my face heat up. "Welcome to the firm." It took him a whole 3 weeks to ask me out. 3 weeks of exchanged smiles in the hallways, of made-up excuses to come to my desk and ask about some client, of shared coffees in the little break room. When he finally mustered up the courage, it was to invite me to the movies to see Love Story, a romance. I said yes right away, of course. We dated for 2 years with all the respect that was customary back then. He would pick me up at home, talk to my parents in the living room, take me for walks in the park for ice cream, to the movies when there was a good film, and to city festivals where we would dance together, but always with that respectable distance that adults would observe. You know how it is? It was a beautiful courtship, without rush. Felipe was different from the other boys I knew. Gentle, attentive, respectful. He never raised his voice, even when we disagreed about something. He had this calm way of resolving things, talking it out, explaining his point of view, and he treated me like a queen. He'd bring me flowers for no special occasion, and remembered little details I mentioned. He made a point of introducing me to everyone as the most beautiful and intelligent woman in Laredo. In 1975, he asked me to marry him. It was a Sunday after lunch at my parents' house. He asked to speak with my father alone, and they were locked in the small room that served as a carpentry workshop for almost an hour. When they came out, my father had tears in his eyes but a smile on his face. Felipe came to me, knelt right there in front of the whole family, and pulled a small box with a simple but beautiful ring out of his pocket. "Helen," he said, his voice trembling a little, "will you marry me and make me the happiest man in this world?" "I don't even need to tell you," I said, "yes, right?" The whole family applauded instantly. My mother cried, and my cousins immediately started arguing about the dress, the cake, and the flowers. We got married 6 months later in a simple ceremony at the First United Methodist Church of Laredo. We didn't have much money, but our families came together to make a beautiful party. My mother and my aunt spent weeks preparing sweets and appetizers. My father made a point of building the table for the cake with his own hands, using the most beautiful wood he could find. Friends took turns helping with the decorations for the church and the fellowship hall. My dress wasn't the most luxurious, but it was made with so much love by my mother and my godmother that for me, it was the most beautiful in the world. Delicate lace, tiny pearls sewn one by one onto the bodice, a modest but elegant train. When I looked in the mirror that day, I barely recognized the girl staring back at me. She looked like a princess from the stories my father used to tell when I was little. Felipe was waiting at the altar, so handsome in his navy blue suit, the only one he owned, but impeccably pressed and tailored for the occasion. When our eyes met, I saw tears in his. He later confessed, "When I saw you walking down the aisle, Helen, I thought my heart was going to burst with so much happiness." We started our life together in a small but cozy apartment near downtown. 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a tight little bathroom. It wasn't much, but to us, it felt like a palace. We decorated it with simple furniture, some made by my father, others bought on an installment plan. I planted geraniums in the windows, sewed colorful curtains, and decorated every corner with the greatest care. Felipe continued to work at the accounting firm, and after the wedding, I started making cakes and sweets to order from home. I'd always loved to bake, and soon my cupcakes, cheesecakes, and party cakes became famous in the neighborhood. It wasn't a steady income like the firm, but it helped with the bills and allowed me to stay home, preparing our nest, because that was our dream, to have a child. From the first days of our marriage, we would talk about it, what they would be like, what we would name them, and how we would raise them. Felipe wanted a boy to play ball with and to teach how to fish on weekends. I dreamed of a girl to dress in ribbons and bows and to teach the family recipes. But deep down, what we really wanted was a healthy baby. It didn't matter if it was a boy or a girl. The first few months of our marriage were pure joy. Discovering each other, learning to live together, making plans, waking up next to him every day, making coffee together before he left for work, and greeting him with a kiss when he came back in the evening. It was a simple happiness, but so complete that sometimes I would find myself feeling scared that it was all too good to last. At night, lying in bed, we would talk about the future. Felipe dreamed of opening his own accounting firm one day. I thought about turning my baking business into something bigger, maybe a small pastry shop. And of course, we planned our family. "I want at least 3 kids," Felipe would say, holding me close. "A house full of children running around, laughing." "3?" I would reply, pretending to be shocked. "Let's start with 1 and then we'll talk." And we would laugh and kiss and try month after month to make that dream come true. After 1 year of trying with no success, we started to worry. Was something wrong? We went to doctors, had tests done, and everything was normal, they said. It's just a matter of time and patience, they would assure us. You're young and healthy. It will happen. And it did. In June of 1977, I finally found out I was pregnant. Oh my God, what a day that was. I took the test at the clinic that morning and spent the entire day planning how I would tell Felipe the news. I made his favorite dinner, a pot roast with mashed potatoes. As the good Texan he was, I set the table with our lace tablecloth we saved for special occasions. I even put flowers in a vase. When he came home from work, he was surprised by all the effort. "Is it our anniversary and I forgot?" he asked, worried. "No, my love," I replied, barely able to hold back a smile. "But we do have something to celebrate." During dinner, we talked about his day, about trivial things. I was practically bursting with the desire to tell him, but I held on for the right moment. When we got to dessert, a chocolate pudding he adored, I placed a small package on the table. "What is this?" he asked, surprised. "Open it and see," I replied, my heart pounding. Inside the box was a tiny pair of crocheted booties that my neighbor had helped me make that very afternoon. Felipe looked at the booties, then at me, then back at the booties. For a moment, he seemed not to understand. Then his eyes widened and filled with tears. "Helen, you're—" I nodded, also crying now. "We're going to have a baby, Felipe. I'm 2 months pregnant." He got up from his chair so fast he almost knocked it over. He came around the table and hugged me tight, lifting me off the floor and spinning me around the small living room. We were laughing and crying at the same time, holding each other, barely believing that our dream was finally coming true. That night, lying in bed, Felipe placed his hand on my still flat belly and just stayed there, in silence, as if he could already feel the baby growing inside. "I'm going to be the best father in the world," he promised, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm going to teach him everything I know. I'll always be there. I'll love this child with all my strength." "I know you will," I replied, running my hand through his hair. "You're already the best husband in the world. You're going to be a wonderful father." The pregnancy was calm, thank God. I had morning sickness for the first few months, but nothing that kept me from doing my chores and baking orders. Felipe became even more attentive, if that was even possible. He'd come home from work with some fruit I was craving. He'd massage my feet when they swelled at the end of the day. He'd read books about babies and child development with so much dedication that sometimes I'd joke he was more pregnant than I was. In the 5th month, we found out we were having a boy. Felipe was so happy, he went out and told the whole town. "We're going to name him Michael Robert," he announced to anyone who would listen. "He's going to be an accountant like his father, or a doctor, or an engineer, whatever he wants to be." We prepared the baby's room with so much love. The walls, which were once white, were painted a light blue with white clouds that my cousin, who was good at drawing, painted for an entire Sunday. The crib was a gift from my parents. My father made a point of building it with his own hands, using the most beautiful wood he could find. My mother and aunts took turns making the layette. Sheets, diapers, blankets, tiny clothes that I would keep in the dresser, running my hand over each piece and imagining the little face that would soon fill those clothes. The last few months were filled with pure anticipation, my belly big, the baby's movements getting stronger, as if he couldn't wait to meet the world. Felipe would talk to my belly every night, telling him about his day, singing him lullabies, and making promises. "I'll take you fishing as soon as you get a little bigger," he would say. "I'm going to teach you how to play football, how to ride a bike, how to be a good man." Mike was born on a cold January morning in 1978, after almost 12 hours of labor. A chubby, rosy baby with a head of black hair that surprised even the doctors. "It looks like he was born with his hair combed," the nurse joked when they put him in my arms for the first time. I felt a love I didn't know was possible. It was as if my heart had doubled in size to accommodate all that feeling. Felipe, beside me, cried without any shame, his eyes fixed on the tiny bundle that was our son. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently running his finger over the baby's cheek. "Thank you, my love. Thank you for giving me this gift." We came home 3 days later, and our life entered a new phase. Sleepless nights, diapers to change, bottles to prepare, cries to decipher. But every challenge came with so much joy that we didn't even feel the tiredness. Mike's first smile, his first little tooth, the first time he rolled over on his own in bed, every milestone was celebrated as if it were the greatest achievement in the world. Felipe proved to be the father he promised he'd be. Even tired from work, he would come home and go straight to the crib. He would pick up our son, play with him, help with his bath, and tell him stories. On weekends, he would put Mike in the stroller and go for a walk around town, proud, showing his son to every acquaintance he met along the way. "Look how smart he is," he would say. "He already knows our voices. He can grab the rattle on his own, my dears." Looking back at those first few years, everything seemed so perfect. We had a beautiful family, a happy marriage, a healthy son who was growing up strong and smart. How could I have imagined that destiny had such a cruel turn in store for us? How could I have known that the same blood that ran in the veins of my great-grandfather Antonio, that man of whispered stories, also ran in my boy's veins? But I'm getting ahead of myself, getting lost in the story. These memories sometimes confuse me, you know. One moment I'm here, smelling homemade bread baking, hearing my little boy's laughter echoing through the house. The next moment, I'm already ahead, watching everything crumble like a sandcastle. My loves, if you've made it this far into the story, please type "I'm listening" in the comments, so I know there are people on the other side keeping me company on this difficult journey. In the next part, I'll tell you about our family's golden years before the shadows started to appear. Stay with me. Yes, Mike's childhood was a dream, my dears. Those first few years brought so much happiness that even now, so many decades later, when I close my eyes, I can still smell that baby scent, hear those delicious giggles echoing through the house, and see those curious little eyes discovering the world. From a very young age, my son showed an extraordinary intelligence. At just 1 year old, he was already speaking a few clear words: mama, dada, water, while other children his age were still just babbling. At 2, he was forming complete sentences that left his daycare teachers impressed. "Grandma Helen, this child is a prodigy," they would say when I went to pick him up. "He talks like a little adult." Felipe was so proud his chest nearly burst his shirt buttons. He bought a Super 8 film camera on 12 installment payments, an incredible luxury for our situation back then, just to record every moment of our son's development. On weekends, he would turn the living room into a movie theater, projecting home movies of Mike on the white wall, taking his first steps, blowing out birthday candles, and playing at the park. "This boy is going to go far," he would say, his eyes shining with expectation. "He has his mother's intelligence and his father's determination. He's going to be a doctor, or maybe even a politician." When Mike turned 3 in 1981, we knew we needed a bigger house. Our little apartment, which once seemed like a palace, was now too small for our son's energy. He needed space to run, to explore, to grow. Luckily, Felipe's business was going well. He had been promoted to manager at the accounting firm, and my baking orders had built a loyal clientele that allowed me to contribute significantly to the family budget. We saved for months and were able to make a down payment on a simple but spacious house in the Vista Hills neighborhood. It had a backyard with a leafy lemon tree, 3 bedrooms, one for us, one for Mike, and one we dreamed of turning into a room for the second child we planned to have. In the front, there was a small porch where I put pots of geraniums and ferns, making the space my little corner of peace. The move to the new house coincided with Mike starting preschool. We carefully chose Little People Preschool, which had an excellent reputation and was only 4 blocks from home. On his first day, I got him ready with so much care. His uniform was impeccably pressed. His lunchbox was filled with sandwiches, fruit, and a surprise cupcake, and his hair was combed with gel smelling of kids' cologne. "You're going to love school, my love," I explained as we walked hand in hand. "You'll make lots of friends, learn new things, and play a lot." He looked at me with those big, serious eyes, the same honey-colored eyes as his father, and replied with a maturity that surprised me. "I know, Mom. I'm going to be the best student in the class." And he was. Mike adapted to school like a fish to water. In just a few weeks, the teachers were already talking about his quick learning, his creativity in drawings, and his natural leadership among the other kids. At home, he asked us to read to him every night, not children's stories, but grown-up books, as he called them. At not quite 4 years old, he already recognized all the letters and could put a few together into simple words. Felipe, beaming with pride, would bring home increasingly advanced children's books, puzzles with more pieces, and educational games that stimulated his mind. He would spend hours on the living room floor building cities out of blocks with his son, inventing fantastical stories about brave princes and mysterious dragons, and patiently answering the boys' curious questions about how things worked, from clocks to stars, from airplanes to ants. "Why is the sky blue, Dad?" "How do fish breathe underwater?" "Where does the sun go at night?" The questions never stopped, and Felipe made a point of looking for real, scientific answers, never underestimating his son's intelligence. Our routine found a comfortable rhythm in those years. Felipe would leave for work early. I would take Mike to school, then come home to prepare the day's baking orders. In the afternoon, I'd pick up our boy, and we'd spend a few hours together doing homework, playing in the backyard, and preparing dinner for Felipe to find when he came home from the office. During school vacations, we would take little trips, usually to visit Mike's paternal grandparents in Dallas, or to spend a few days at Galveston Beach. They weren't luxurious vacations. We stayed at simple guest houses and brought food from home to save money. But they were precious moments, filled with simple joys like sandcastles, ice cream on the beach, and boat rides. I remember one of those trips in January of 1983 when Mike was 5 years old. We were at Galveston Beach on a sunny afternoon. Felipe had gone to buy us popsicles, and I was watching Mike play in the wet sand, focused on building an elaborate system of canals for the ocean water to flow in and out of. Suddenly, an older boy, he must have been around 8, came running and deliberately stomped right through the middle of the construction, destroying everything. I got up immediately, ready to intervene, to comfort my son, who I was sure was about to start crying. But to my surprise, Mike didn't cry. He looked at the boy with a strangely calm expression and said in a voice that didn't sound like a child's, "You're going to regret that." The older boy laughed mockingly. "And what are you going to do, little boy? Cry to your mommy?" Mike continued to stare at him, motionless, with that fixed gaze that for an instant, just a flicker, reminded me of the stories about my great-grandfather. Then, without warning, he grabbed a handful of wet sand and threw it directly into the boy's eyes, who fell backward, screaming in pain. "Mike!" I cried, running toward them. "What did you do?" He turned to me, and his face was already that of my sweet boy again, with eyes wide with fear, as if he didn't even understand what he had just done. "He ruined my castle, Mom," he replied, his voice trembling. I got angry. The incident was quickly resolved. I apologized to the other boy's mother and explained that Mike had never done anything like that before, and that it had just been an impulsive reaction. On the way back to the guest house, I had a serious talk with my son about how we need to control our impulses and how hurting others is never the solution, even when we're very angry. "Mike, we can't hurt people," I said. "Do you understand?" He nodded, seeming genuinely remorseful. "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know what happened. It was like another person threw the sand." At the time, I took that as just a child's way of avoiding responsibility. It was only years later that I realized that maybe, just maybe, there was more truth to that statement than I could have imagined. But that was just an isolated incident. In general, Mike was a sweet, affectionate, and obedient child. All the neighbors, teachers, and family friends would comment on how polite, helpful, and intelligent he was. A golden child, they would say. And he was. at least in those golden years of childhood. When Mike turned 7 in 1985, something happened that would profoundly mark our family. Felipe, who had been working twice as hard at the firm, finally managed to raise enough capital to open his own business. With the help of a partner, Frank, a friend from college, he founded Frontier Accounting, a modest firm but one with great ambitions. It was a period of a lot of hard work, sleepless nights, and sacrificed weekends. Felipe would come home exhausted, but with a sparkle in his eyes that spoke of dreams coming true. I did everything I could to support him. I prepared nutritious meals for him to take to work and made sure the house was always in order, protecting the few hours he had at home so he could rest or spend quality time with our son. Mike, even though he was young, seemed to understand the importance of that moment. He didn't complain when his father missed a school presentation or came home too late for a goodnight kiss. Instead, he showed interest in the new business. He would ask to visit the office on weekends and watch, fascinated, as Felipe explained balances, taxes, and accounting. "When I grow up, I'm going to work with you, Dad," he announced once, sitting in the swivel chair that was much too big for his little body. "We'll be partners." Felipe smiled, touched, and ruffled his son's hair. "Of course, champ. The company will be called Felipe and Son. How does that sound?" Felipe's hard work paid off. In just 2 years, Frontier Accounting already had a respectable client list, including some of the most important merchants in Laredo and even some from the Mexican side of the border in Nuevo Laredo, Mexico. With the business prospering, we were finally able to make other dreams come true. We traded our old sedan for a brand new Ford. What a luxury that car was, my God. We renovated the kitchen in our house and enrolled Mike in a private school, the best one in the city. In 1988, when our son turned 10, we decided to throw a special birthday party. In previous years, we had celebrated simply, a small cake at home, a few friends invited, modest gifts. But now that our financial situation was more stable, we wanted to celebrate in a big way. We rented the community club hall, hired a superhero-themed decorator. Mike was a huge fan of Spider-Man. And I ordered a 3-tiered cake, decorated with all the comic book characters he collected. Felipe bought him a new bicycle, our boy's dream gift, and I sewed a personalized superhero vest with the initials MR embroidered on the chest. It was an unforgettable party. Over 30 kids attended. There were games organized by professional entertainers, and we gave out elaborate party favors that I put together myself. Mike was radiant, running from one place to another, greeting friends, and proudly showing off the vest I had made for him. When it was time to sing Happy Birthday, with our son in the center, surrounded by friends and family, and exchanging glances of pure happiness with Felipe, I thought life couldn't get any better. We had built something precious, something solid, a happy marriage, a wonderful son, and a comfortable financial situation. The future seemed so promising, so full of possibilities. I couldn't have imagined that in just a few years, everything we built with so much love would begin to crumble. That the small, subtle signs we sometimes noticed in Mike's behavior, but chose to ignore, were just the prelude to a devastating storm that was approaching. The following years passed in a pleasant routine. Mike distinguished himself more and more in school, always among the top students, participating in math competitions, science fairs, and essay contests. At 12, he was already reading complex books, keeping a journal where he wrote surprisingly mature thoughts, and demonstrating multiple talents, from playing the guitar, a birthday gift when he turned 13, to drawing with almost photographic precision. But we also noticed some peculiarities. He was an intense kid. When he became interested in something, he would dive in almost obsessively. He went through phases of fixation on dinosaurs, then astronomy, then quantum physics, topics he would study with an unusual depth for his age. And he also had a solitary side. Despite being popular at school, he seemed to prefer his own company, spending hours in his room reading, writing, and drawing. "Is this normal?" I asked Felipe one night after noticing that Mike had spent the entire Saturday locked in his room working on a secret project he refused to show us. "Other kids his age always want to go out and play in the street." "Our son is special, Helen," Felipe replied reassuringly. He has a brilliant mind. It's natural that he's not interested in the same things as other kids. Einstein was like that as a child, you know? I accepted that explanation because I wanted to believe it. Because it was easier to see our son as a misunderstood genius than to admit that something might be wrong. And in fact, most of the time, Mike was just an exceptionally intelligent and slightly introspective teenager. He had friends, participated in school activities, and talked to us about his interests and his plans for the future. In 1993, when he turned 15, Felipe decided it was time to get him more actively involved in the family business. Not as an official employee, of course, he was still too young, but as an apprentice during school vacations and on some Saturdays. Mike would go with his father to the office, learning the basics of accounting and observing how a business was run. To our surprise and delight, he showed a natural aptitude for numbers, organization, and the logic of balances and statements. In just a few weeks, he could already perform simple tasks without supervision, filing documents, entering data into spreadsheets, and answering phone calls. Felipe was bursting with pride. "He has a knack for business, Helen," he would say, excited. "When he finishes college, he's going to revolutionize the firm. I'm certain that under his leadership, frontier accounting will expand throughout the state." Those were good times. Mike seemed to have found a purpose, something that channeled his intense mental energy in a productive way. At home, we talked about the future. He would study accounting, maybe at the University of Texas in Austin, or even down in Houston. Then he would come back to gradually take over his father's business. Everything seemed to be on track, planned and promising, until 1995. It was shortly after Mike's 17th birthday when I noticed the first significant changes in his behavior. It started with small things. He, who had always been so organized, started leaving his room a mess, clothes scattered, books piled up in disarray, notebooks open on his bed. His sleep, which had always been so regular, became erratic. Sometimes I would find him awake at 3 a.m, writing frantically in notebooks he would hide when I walked into the room. "I'm just studying, Mom," he would explain with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have an important test tomorrow." But it was a school vacation, and there were no tests. His appetite also changed. He had always enjoyed eating, especially the meals I prepared with so much care. Now he would barely touch his food. He was visibly losing weight, his clothes starting to hang loosely on his adolescent body. "Are you eating enough, son?" I asked one night, worried as I watched him just push his rice around on his plate. "Are you sick?" "I'm not hungry," he replied dryly. "And stop treating me like a kid, Mom. I can take care of myself." The abruptness was also new. Mike had always been polite and respectful. Now, he would answer with impatience, get irritated easily, and isolate himself more and more. Felipe tried to talk to him man to man, thinking it was just normal teenage rebellion. "Son, your mom is worried. I am too. If there's something bothering you, you can tell us. We're here to help." "There's nothing wrong with me," Mike exploded, slamming his bedroom door. "I just want you to leave me alone." We started getting phone calls from the school. Mike, the star student, was skipping classes. When he did attend, he seemed lethargic, unable to concentrate. Other times he was too agitated, interrupting teachers with questions or comments out of context. His grades, which were always excellent, plummeted. "We're worried," the school counselor said during a tense meeting. "Michael has always been one of our best students. This drastic change in behavior could indicate serious problems. Maybe drugs, maybe depression. Have you noticed anything at home?" Of course we had noticed, but hearing it from a professional's mouth, in the formality of that room with framed diplomas on the walls, made it all terribly real. This wasn't just a phase. Something was truly wrong with our son. We decided to take him to a doctor. It wasn't easy to convince him. He screamed and resisted, accusing us of thinking he was crazy. But Felipe was firm, using that authoritative tone he rarely needed to use for the first time. "It's not a choice, Mike. You're going to the doctor, and that's final." The family doctor ran a battery of tests, blood, urine, even a scan to rule out neurological problems. Everything was normal. "Physically, your son is fine. he assured us, but I strongly recommend a psychological or psychiatric evaluation. The word psychiatric hit our family like a bomb. Felipe initially resisted. "My son is not crazy, doctor." But I insisted. I had started to make connections I didn't want to make. The stories about my great-grandfather Antonio, Mike's age, 17, which was exactly when they said my great-grandfather's mental problems had started to manifest. "It's just one appointment, Felipe," I argued, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "If it's nothing, that's great. But if it's something that needs treatment, the sooner we find out, the better." Reluctantly, he agreed. I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Johnson, the only psychiatrist in town. He was an elderly man with a reputation for being competent, despite his somewhat old-fashioned ways. Mike refused to go on the morning of the appointment. He locked himself in the bathroom and wouldn't come out, not with pleas or threats. "You want to lock me up?" he screamed through the door. "You want to get rid of me like you did with the crazy old man of the family?" That sent a chill down my spine. We had never told Mike about my great-grandfather. How could he have known? When we finally managed to convince him to come out of the bathroom, Felipe threatened to knock down the door. He was different, too calm, almost serene, with a strange smile on his lips. "Okay," he said docilely. "Let's go to the doctor. You're right. I'm not well." The sudden change in attitude should have alarmed me, but I was so relieved that I didn't question it. On the way to the office, sitting in the back seat of the car, Mike was quietly humming a song I didn't recognize. Looking in the rearview mirror, I noticed his eyes were glassy, fixed on some invisible point, and his lips were moving as if he was talking to someone. It was at that moment, watching my son in the rearview mirror on the way to the psychiatrist, that I saw for the first time what I had been so afraid of. In my own son's eyes, the same vacant look they said my great-grandfather had before he tried to hang his own sister, and I knew with a devastating certainty that my family's nightmare had returned. The appointment with Dr. Johnson was both revealing and terrifying. Initially, Mike was cooperative, answering questions with apparent clarity. But when the doctor started to explore his recent behavioral changes, something shifted. My son started speaking faster, jumping from one topic to another, using complicated words and sentences that barely made sense. "The numbers talk to me, doctor," he said, his eyes shining with a feverish intensity. "They have colors and textures. 7 is red and rough like sandpaper. 3 is blue and slick like soap. The universe is encoded in mathematical patterns that only I can see." Then he suddenly fell silent, staring intently at an empty corner of the room. When the doctor asked what he was thinking, Mike replied in a low voice, "He's here. The man in the hat is telling me you can't be trusted." It felt as if the floor had opened up beneath my feet. Felipe squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, but I barely felt it. My focus was entirely on our son, who now seemed to be having an animated conversation with the empty space. Dr. Johnson's diagnosis was cautious, but direct. "Your son is showing symptoms suggestive of a schizophrenia spectrum disorder, auditory and visual hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking. The age is typical for the onset of symptoms, especially in men." "But he was always so normal," Felipe protested, his voice breaking. "So smart, so well-adjusted." "Schizophrenia often affects brilliant people," the doctor explained, "and the first psychotic episodes are often preceded by a period of normal functioning. It's a treacherous disease. That's exactly why when we notice the signs, the process is often already advanced." We left that appointment with a prescription for medication and the recommendation to seek more specialized treatment in Dallas, where there were psychiatrists with more experience in cases like Mike's. The drive home was silent, heavy. In the back seat, our son had returned to his silence, staring out the window with an absent expression. That night, after putting Mike to bed, he took the first pill without resistance, which surprised me. Felipe and I sat on the porch, our hands clasped, trying to process the new reality that was unfolding. "It's all going to be okay," Felipe repeated. more to himself than to me. We'll get him the best treatment, the best doctors. Our son will overcome this. I wanted to believe him. Lord knows I did. But something inside me knew our life would never be the same again. That the golden years were behind us, and now we were facing a dark, uncertain, and terrifying journey. What we didn't know yet was how awful this journey would be. We couldn't have imagined that in just a few months we would lose not only our son's sanity, but also the pillar that held our family together. That destiny had an even greater trial in store for us,